Hi M&Ms, welcome back to another episode of Murder and More. As always, I am your host, Kira. Your early 20s should be some of the best years of your life. You've just become an adult, you're developing your independence and exploring the big wide world for yourself. You leave your parents and begin to build a life of your own. You may have your own house, your own job, and maybe even considering starting a family with the person you love. Everyone has the right to life, to have the opportunity to love life, earn money, and mature and evolve as a person. Everyone has the right to grow old with the person they love. For Joanna Yeates, however, this opportunity would be snatched from her in a really brutal way. Joanna Yeates was born on the 19th of April 1985 in Hampshire. She attended a boarding school in Hampshire and then went on to get a degree in landscape architect. In 2008, Joanna started working at a landscape architect firm called Highland Edgar Driver, where she met her boyfriend Greg Reardon. Joanna was part of a close and loving family, with her mum saying that Joanna inspired her to do things that she wouldn't usually do, and her dad described Joanna as a breath of fresh air, buoyant, happy, and always positive. In 2009, Joanna moved in with her boyfriend, and they ended up settling in Bristol together in order to further and continue their career at the company they both worked for, which had moved to Bristol. The couple moved into a basement flat at 44 Canning Road in Clifton. Their landlord, a retired English teacher, Christopher Jeffries, lived in the building as well. He described the couple as young, enthusiastic, and anxious to set up home together, and he was just pleased to help them achieve that goal. He liked Joanna and Greg and said that there was nothing unattractive about them as tenants. Now, I'm going to start this story exactly where it starts for Greg and Joanna's family. On Sunday the 19th of December 2010 at about 8 p.m, Greg returned to the flat he shared with Joanna after visiting family in Sheffield to find that she wasn't there. Now, usually this might not be weird or alarming, but Greg had been trying to get hold of her all weekend and had no luck. He had sent several texts to Joanna and tried to ring both her mobile and the landline, but got no response all weekend, and it was unusual for Joanna not to keep in touch. He tried to phone her again, but heard her phone ringing from the pocket of her coat. At about midnight, Greg phoned Joanna's parents to make sure that she wasn't just spending the night with them, but she wasn't, and his next step was to phone the police and report his girlfriend missing. Whilst he made the call, Joanna's parents immediately jumped out of bed and made the drive to Bristol to help search for their daughter. As Greg looked round the flat, he noticed Jo's phone, coat, boots, keys, and purse were all still in the flat. The only thing that was missing was Jo herself. Greg also noticed that their cat had appeared to have been neglected, which was also highly unusual. So let's go through what we know for certain were Joanna's last movements. On the Friday, the 17th of December, Joanna had her work Christmas party. She kissed Greg goodbye as he headed up to Sheffield to spend some time with his family, and she headed to a pub where she met her colleagues for a few drinks after work. At about 8 p.m, Jo left the Bristol Ram and made the half-an-hour walk home. We know that at 8:10 she stopped at Waitrose but didn't buy anything. She then bought 2 bottles of cider at a bargain booze. We know then that at 8:30 Jo phoned her best friend and they made plans to meet up on Christmas Eve. Jo's last confirmed movements were at 20 to 9, where she bought a pizza in Tesco. We do know that about 5 to 10 minutes after this, she made it back to her flat and started to prepare her dinner. But when Greg got home and her parents arrived, they found the receipt for the pizza, which confirmed Jo had definitely made it home. But there was no sign of the pizza or the packaging it came in. Police quickly sensed the seriousness of this case. Jo had no reason to disappear. She'd never disappeared before. She had no personal issues that would cause her to run away. She wasn't on any medication, had no mental health issues, no history of depression. Because she had no risk factors for being a runaway, police were immediately concerned for Jo's safety. On the 21st of December, Jo's parents made an emotional police appeal, pleading for their daughter's safe return.
Jo, my little Jo, come back. And if anybody's got her, don't keep her. Give her back to us. We miss her so much. I know that's obvious, and nobody can feel the pain that we feel.
I've got to believe that she's alive. She had too much life in her. If it turns out that she isn't, I still want her back. I still want to hold her at least one last time before I do. I just want her back.
Greg, along with Jo's friends, set up a website and used social media to help look for Jo. On the 23rd of December, the police held another press conference where Jo's father stated, "I think she was abducted after getting home to her flat. I have no idea of the circumstances of the abduction because of what was left behind. I feel sure she would not have gone out by herself, leaving all these things behind, and she was taken away somewhere." On the 25th of December 2010, at about 8:45 in the morning, a couple were walking their dog in Longwood Lane, about 3 miles from Jo's flat. Just next to a wall at the side of the lane, they noticed a mound of snow. Initially, they walked past it, but they felt that something wasn't quite right, so went back to investigate. When they looked closer, the couple noticed part of a pair of jeans were exposed, and they began to suspect it was a human body. Quickly, the police were able to confirm that the body was indeed that of missing 25-year-old Joanna Yeates. A post-mortem revealed that Jo had died as a result of strangulation, and there was no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. The night Jo went missing, a witness says they heard a scream coming from the direction of Jo's flat at about 9 p.m, which would have been the time she was at home preparing the missing pizza. This made police think that she was probably attacked in her flat, but there was no sign of forced entry, no smashed windows or doors. This made police believe she was probably attacked by someone that she let in, either someone she knew or at least recognized. Police were already looking into Christopher Jeffries as a person of interest when Jo's body was found. Christopher was a quiet guy who lived alone and had never been married. Police also found out that he'd had a conversation with Greg on the Friday afternoon, meaning there was a possibility he knew Jo would be alone and decided to strike that evening. Now, I honestly didn't think I knew anything about this case. I thought it was brand new to me because I didn't recognize the name. That was until the documentary I watched got to Chris Jeffries, and I instantly remember the media craze around the case and their belief that Chris was guilty of Jo's murder, mainly based on the fact that he was a little bit quirky, he didn't own a TV, much preferring to read his books, he had sort of crazy hair, he would make sort of crazy gestures like dyeing his hair blue. He was a quirky guy, and I think that was the main reason media believed that he was guilty. The police believed that they had enough evidence against Chris, and at about 7 a.m. on the 30th of December, they arrested Christopher Jeffries on suspicion of the murder of Joanna Yeates. About 3 hours after this arrest, they received a call from someone who also lived in one of the flats at 44 Canning Road, and the information he gave police was damning. Before I go on, let me give you a bit of a background about this witness, Vincent Tabac. Vincent was a young Dutchman who had also moved to Bristol to work his way up the career ladder, with an expertise in the field of people flow and public spaces. Vincent left a nice, quiet town in Holland where people described him as a normal child, but said that he didn't really have any friends and he quite often played alone. Neighbours described Vincent as a pleasant, quiet, private boy that turned into an ordinary, introverted guy. Vincent studied at Eindhoven in his teens and was a good student who was noted for his methodical approach to problem solving. Eindhoven is now the smartest region in the world, making Vincent one of the clever ones. Whilst Vincent spent a lot of time plotting the movements of large groups of people, he didn't actually spend a lot of time with people, preferring to keep himself to himself. Vincent lived in more of a virtual world, spending a lot of time in front of his computer. He was highly intelligent with a systematic approach to life, but people's descriptions of him varied. Sometimes he liked to hide away and preferred his computer screen, and other times he was very sociable. Vincent's family describe him as shy, steady, and calm, whereas his colleagues describe him as outgoing. Anyway, back to the story. Vincent was in Holland at the time of Chris Jeffries' arrest, but it became apparent that he'd been following the case online. At about 10 a.m, Vincent phoned the police and told them that on the night Joe disappeared, he remembered Chris's car had changed direction overnight, insinuating that Chris had left his flat late Friday night or early Saturday morning and had driven somewhere. Although this doesn't necessarily mean Chris murdered Joe, it was still a significant detail to police. The police questioned Chris at the police station whilst forensic investigators searched his flat. On the 31st of December, a senior officer granted investigators a further 12 hours to question Chris and search his flat. On the 1st of January 2011, police realised they had no evidence to link Chris to Joe's murder and released him on bail. This meant that Joe's killer was still at large and a potential danger to the women of Bristol. Police moved on from Chris and began looking at Vincent Tabac, who had knowingly given them false information to incriminate an innocent person. They knew Vincent was alone in his flat on the evening of the 17th of December as his girlfriend, Tanya, had been at her own Christmas party outside of Bristol, so officers made a trip over to Holland to question him and his girlfriend on New Year's Eve. Police questioned Vincent and his girlfriend, but he was acting suspiciously to them. He was more interested in sort of the forensic side of the investigation than actually finding Joe's murderer. To make police's suspicion of Vincent worse, he was really reluctant to give them a sample of his DNA, which, as an innocent person, makes you look super guilty. Vincent immediately became a person of interest to the police, who started investigating him properly. Forensic investigators found samples of an unknown person's DNA on Joe's body, and when they compared this DNA to the samples Vincent had provided, unsurprisingly, the samples were a match, with less than a 1 in a billion chance that it wasn't Vincent's DNA. On the 20th of January 2011, Vincent Tabac was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Joanna Yeates, and his possessions were seized for examination. Christopher Jeffries recalls his surprise at Vincent's arrest and said that Vincent just didn't strike him as somebody he would suspect as being a murderer, and actually had concerns that police had once again arrested an innocent person. Journalists and the media in Holland also believed that this was a miscarriage of justice, with Vincent's family having no idea why he'd been arrested for the murder and they were completely convinced that he was innocent. So let's take a quick look at Vincent's movements the evening Jo was murdered. We already know that Vincent was alone as his girlfriend was at her work's Christmas party, and the plan was for Vincent to pick her up in the early hours of the morning, which I have to assume he did, as there's no reports to suggest otherwise. At some point that evening, he texts Tanya to say that he missed her and that it was boring without her. He then went to an Asda in Bedminster, about 3.5 miles from Clifton, where he bought rock salt. Now, there are plenty of shops in Clifton, so this makes police question, why did he go all the way to Bedminster? When he got back to his flat, he went onto his computer and checked his emails and proceeded to enter a world that no one else knew he inhabited. A world of pornography, specifically violent porn, where he watched women be degraded and watched sadomasochistic practices, including strangulation, which, as we know, is how Jo was killed. Whilst in custody, Vincent was absolutely no help to police and gave no comment answers. Police found CCTV of Vincent in Asda at about 10:30, where he walked into the shop and then back out and then back in again for seemingly no reason at all, and police wondered if he was ensuring the CCTV had caught him to create an alibi, as after all he knew all about the design of public spaces and no doubt knew where all the CCTV cameras would be, which a part of me thinks is why he went to Bedminster that evening and didn't just go to the shops in Clifton. Maybe at the time the shops there didn't use CCTV, but he knew for sure that Asda did, and he knew he'd be caught on one of them. Police searched Vincent's laptop and found loads of evidence linking him to violent pornographic websites. But they also uncovered a fascination with Joanna's disappearance. They found that as early as the 19th of December at about 10:30, he was looking on Google Maps at Longwood Lane, specifically the exact location Joanna's body had been left. Now, if you recall, that was the evening Greg returned to an empty flat. Jo hadn't even been reported missing at 10:30. Police needed physical evidence, so they searched Vincent's car, and in the boot they found microscopic areas of blood, and when that was sent off for testing, it was confirmed to be Jo's blood. There is no other way Jo's blood could have gotten into the boot of his car unless that's how he transported her body to Longwood Lane. On the 22nd of January 2011, Vincent Tabac was charged with the murder of Joanna Yeates. He appeared briefly at Bristol Crown Court on the 24th of January, where he was remanded in custody. Vincent initially claimed that he had no involvement in Jo's murder and that the evidence linking him to it had been fabricated by corrupt officers. However, on the 8th of February, Vincent disclosed to a prison chaplain that he had murdered Jo and was planning on pleading guilty. Police found on Vincent's personal and work laptop that he had been researching British laws, specifically looking at the difference between murder and manslaughter, which made police think he was planning on arguing that Jo's death was an accident. And they were right. On the 5th of May 2011, Vincent Tabac pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Joanna Yeates, but denied murder. However, this plea was rejected by the Crown Prosecution Service. The trial started on the 4th of October 2011 at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution told the court that Vincent had strangled Jo in her flat just a few minutes after she got home and used sufficient force to kill her. They stated that Vincent, who was about a foot taller than Jo, had used his height to overpower her and pinned her to the floor by her wrists. They told the court that Jo had 43 injuries, including cuts and bruises to her head, neck, torso and arms, indicative of Jo fighting for her life. Whilst the prosecution told the court Jo's death would have been slow and painful, they gave no motive for the attack. Vincent claimed that as he walked past Jo's kitchen window that evening, she waved at him and he took this as a suggestion that he should come in. The prosecution asked Vincent how she suggested this, and he demonstrated Jo waving as a greeting, not as her beckoning him to come into the flat. He claimed he entered the flat and the pair chatted for sort of 10 or 15 minutes until Jo made a flirtatious comment and Vincent tried to kiss her. He says that she didn't like it and backed away, and he simply put his hand over her mouth to stop her screaming. But when he removed his hand, she began screaming again, so he placed it back over her mouth, with a minimum of 20 years. He claims that he panicked and unintentionally strangled her to death. The jury was sent out to deliberate on the 26th of October, and on the 28th of October, they returned with their verdict. Vincent Tabac was found guilty of the murder of Joanna Yeates and was sentenced to life in prison. Honestly, I don't believe for a second that this was a flirty comment and attempted kiss gone wrong. Vincent was into violent pornography and strangulation-related sadomasochistic practices. I don't believe it's a coincidence that Jo was strangled. Also, the 43 defense injuries to Jo's body wouldn't have been present if he just accidentally strangled her. In my opinion, Vincent knocked on Jo's door that night after watching some violent porn and ambushed her. He entered her flat and immediately overpowered her with his height and build. I think he attacked her, took her to the bedroom where she fought for her life, and he eventually strangled her to death. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he enjoyed every last minute. Vincent was, or is rather, a sick and twisted individual who led a life no one else knew he led. His obsession with violence is what led to Jo's murder, and if he hadn't have been caught, a part of me has to wonder if he would have just carried on killing. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to head over to Apple Podcasts to leave a rating and review, and Patreon to consider becoming a patron of Murder and More. To interact with us, you can follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Murder and More, Instagram at Murder and More Pod, and Facebook at Murder and More Podcast. Have a great week, and I'll see you all next week for another episode.